Welcome to Pause for the Truth, where you can sit back, relax, and hear an honest dialogue about health, wealth, legal, and social issues. The hosts are Dr. Rogers Kane, family practice physician, and Jocelyn Turner, health education consultant, with co hosts from the Northeast Florida Medical Society and its foundation. Stay tuned for the truth about matters affecting you and your family. We're here to tell you what's really going on and why. Good evening and welcome to Pause for the Truth. I am your co host, Jocelyn Turner. As I say, and I have been saying for the past several weeks, it's a lovely day in Northeast Florida. A little rainy, but nonetheless, it's a lovely day because in some places they wish they had the weather that we had 70s. I love it when it's in the 70s or 80. That's some good weather. We have a very exciting show for you all tonight. If you got the flyer, then you know that I said recognizing mental illness, but after talking to our guests, we're going to share a different perspective, but include a conversation on that as well. Before we get to our guests, of course, I'd like to bring in my co-host, Dr. Rogers Kane. Dr. Kane, how are you doing this evening?
I'm doing well. There will be a little, since you mentioned weather, there will be a day or two we're going to have drop down into the 50s.
Really?
Yes.
Wow. Meteorologist and doctor. Good thing, right?
A doctor meteorologist. Okay, meteorology, whatever.
Well, that's still good weather, Dr. Kane.
Yes. I'd like to welcome the gentleman as well, Ms. Turner. These are people that I just want to let the audience know that you are the expert when it comes to mental health in this crew, your Pause for the Truth crew, and you managed to bring in some very excellent guests, which I'll let you introduce, and we move forward.
Well, thank you, Dr. Kane. And I am super excited. One of these gentlemen, I've been knowing him when he talked about how long he's been in Jacksonville. I was like, you know what? I think I've been knowing him almost that many years through the time I had my experience at the health department and him with the University of North Florida. And that is none other than Dr. Richmond Wynn. How are you doing, Dr. Wynn?
I'm quite well and so glad to be a part of this conversation. Thank you for having me.
And by the way, congratulations on your award the other night. It was the something green. I'm sorry, forgive me.
Shades of Green
Shades
is,
of Green.
the Mental Health Awards Gala that is sponsored by Step by Step for Health, behavioral health here in Jacksonville.
I saw all the photos online, and a lot of great people as yourself were recognized. So I wanted to say welcome. And in a moment, I'll give you an opportunity to say a little bit of us, kind of expand with our audience so they'll know more about you and your experience. And this other gentleman, I actually met a couple of weeks ago by hearing him do a presentation with our Population Health Consortium Subcommittee. And he is Merlin Tony Baker. How are you doing this evening, Mr. Baker?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Oh, absolutely. This topic tonight means so much to so many people, right? When we talk about mental health, we've done a lot of conversations on our physical bodies, right? But we know when it comes to our mental health, and I like to also talk about Black men and mental health and mental wellness because of the work over the years that I've done, Dr. Kane and I, with the Men's Health Coalition. And so I think, Mr. Baker, that's one of the things that you talked about in the meeting a couple of weeks ago. And so we want to delve into that. And I know you have another responsibility, so I'm going to yield to you most of the first half of the show, since we'll have Dr. Wynn for the entire hour. So, Mr. Baker, tell us, what's your experience with mental wellness or mental health and men?
First of all, that's an excellent question. I work in the private practice setting. And so to kind of give you an example, most of the calls I get when people want services, it goes something like, are you Black? Are you African American? That's one of the first things that people will ask in terms of mental health services, because a lot of times they want someone that can identify with them and that looks like them. Another question that I'm asked, particularly by couples when they come to couples counseling, is, okay, are you a man? Are you going to be there? Because my husband will not come to counseling unless another man is there, because he'll feel like the women are going to gang up on him. So I get that experience of the first two things. The third thing I get is most often I'm the first therapist that anyone has ever seen in their entire family. So number four, that puts a level of unique pressure on me to make sure that everything goes well. Because I do understand sometimes people's first experience, they may look at that not like they look at hamburgers. And let me explain that. Most people don't stop eating hamburgers because they don't like Burger King. They'll just go to McDonald's, they'll go to Five Guys, they'll go to Crystal's, but they do not stop eating hamburgers. But unfortunately, when it comes to therapy, if the therapist doesn't get it right the initial time, a lot of people, particularly African-American males and females, but in particular African-American males, they will not come to therapy anymore. So just to kind of give you an entry level experience of what I deal with on a day-to-day basis when it comes to running a private clinical practice.
Wow, that's very interesting. I've never heard it broken down like that. I'm going to come back to you, Dr. Nguyen. Tell us about your experience. You know, I and by the way, I forgot to share that I Googled both of you, and you have an awesome awesome background. But tell us a little bit about the work you've done over the years, Dr. Nguyen.
Wow. Gosh, so I started many decades ago in counseling, and I started out in the substance abuse counseling arena. You know, we had these dedicated substance abuse counseling programs and treatment centers. And I have to say, I'm a little biased, even though I started out there. I don't think that separating out substance use disorders from other mental health disorders is the best approach. But that's kind of how we have done, and it still exists that way in most places, where we say substance abuse is over here and other and mental health, say, well, it's all mental health. Typically, and Merlin may be able to speak to this too, but usually when you have somebody who is dealing with significant substance use disorder, substance use problems, especially the ones that wind up in treatment programs, there's other stuff going on. The substance use is just a symptom of something else going on underneath, usually other mental health problems. So I treat substance use disorders as what we call co-occurring or dual diagnosis. So I started out in substance use disorders. I worked in traditional mental health, other mental health disorders. And I've just been fortunate to have a very rich employment background and had a lot of different experiences in for-profit and not-for-profit, and hospitals and jails, a state hospital out in McClenny, and the Duval County Jail downtown I worked in. And then I 22 years ago, I landed at the University of North Florida's Counseling Center. And that was a breath of fresh air for me. I was coming out of an administrative position at a hospital, psychiatric hospital. And it was just a great relief to just go back to just doing counseling and not have to worry about all that other stuff. And then I later became a full-time professor of clinical mental health counseling, and even returned back to the Counseling Center for a while to become the director for a little bit. So I like I said, I'm very fortunate to have had experience in a lot of different settings and a lot of different arenas. So it's been a really good run.
That's awesome. So tell me, COVID-19, I have to go there. I know we're all sick of talking about COVID, but it's a lot of people are sharing that they're having a hard time going back to pre-COVID, that it was so stressful. Some people, obviously, because of loss of loved ones or friends, but others just trying to get their groove back, get back into their routine, and the fear of getting the disease, even though they may have been vaccinated and boosted. But we all know that COVID has not gone away. What have you found in your line of work that you saw the most when, as a result of the pandemic? Did you see did you have a lot of clients come in since, or and Dr. Nguyen, I know you're on the college campus, but tell me about your experience, both of you, as far as what the pandemic has done with the population of people that you see.
You want to go ahead, Mark?
Baker.
So I think for me, it did a number of things. Number one, there were a lot of people who would never ever come to counseling that came to counseling. And it's almost like you can almost divide time now between pre-COVID and post-COVID. So that's how significant it was, number one. Number two, and we can't talk about COVID in African Americans, we're not talking about the disparity. Because I still remember when they made that announcement and when they start showing the faces of the people that were dying. And unfortunately, people treated it like, okay, well, let's keep going on with life. And they opened up the schools, or we can go back to school. But prior to that, it was like a situation as to where it was America's problem. But then statistically, when more minorities were dying from it, for some reason, a lot of people, when they came into my office, they felt like America betrayed them in a way. So I dealt with some level of that in terms of some race-based traumatic situation with that. But more importantly, and over that, a lot of depression, dealt with a lot of marital crises because they couldn't go to work and folks had to be around each other. And they recognized, like that old song you say, love will keep us together. That's a big lie. Love, because there were a lot of people that divorced during COVID. But unfortunately, as it was alluded to, a lot of people lost loved ones as well.
You stuck at home with your spouse.
Yeah, right.
And before you got a relief, kind of a daily vacation, just not going to work. And so a lot of people took that, didn't view it as a chance for retreat, from their spouse. But it, realistically speaking, that's the way it was.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned trauma, because I actually wrote that down. I wanted to touch on trauma because I think what happened, so the pandemic in and of itself, many people experience as a traumatic event. And even though it wouldn't necessarily meet the criteria in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, but we know that doesn't always, speak to everybody's experience. And so, so and some of it was because loved ones were dying and stuff. But even if they didn't have loved ones that were very ill or died, just the dramatic and sudden change in our lifestyles was traumatic for a lot of people. And then the other thing was that whatever traumatic experience people had associated with directly with the pandemic, triggered other unresolved traumatic experiences or traumatic experiences that people thought they had resolved, right? And then they started having, flashbacks and symptoms and other things again. And so I think, and I like to look at trauma even on a continuum. It's like, we can have these small T, large T trauma experiences, and many of us don't even recognize it sometimes. So I think that happened for a lot of people. We talked a lot about isolation and loneliness that occurred, whether people were home alone or home with family and friends, but still disconnected from their usual life. And so still, even in a house full of people, could still experience intense loneliness and missing, like you said, Jocelyn, that pre-COVID experience. And so part of the conversations that I had with people during that time was to think about, evolving beyond COVID, but not necessarily trying to return to pre-COVID experience. Because to be honest, I don't think that's possible. No, I don't think it's possible to return to life exactly as we knew it pre-COVID. We can evolve beyond COVID and understand we can, pull some pieces back into our lives, and like many of us have done, right? And know that we are forever impacted by the experience.
I was going to say too, another thing that happened too, Jocelyn, you mentioned about certain things that I saw. The suicide rate and suicide ideations went up as well. And there were certain people that would come to my office who never thought about killing themselves, wanted to kill themselves, and they were thinking about it. People that you wouldn't imagine who were depressed they were dealing with a lot of depressive symptoms. And so I think what Dr. Wynn was sharing is so powerful because it enabled a lot of people to be open to mental health therapy, and it let people know the legitimacy of it. Not only that, and probably I would say the most powerful factor that came out of COVID is telehealth.
Ah, yes.
Telehealth, because prior to COVID, telehealth was kind of it was there, but a lot of companies and a lot of companies that I work with as a provider in terms of EAP provider and insurance companies, telehealth was okay, but it wasn't the go-to. But when COVID came out, telehealth became the go-to and it legitimized telehealth. So much so to the point as to where mental health counselors were able to cross over into other states because there was so many therapeutic services that were needed. I heard a statistic that was powerful, that for every 33 therapists is 100,000 people.
Wow.
Let me get
I can believe that.
For every 33 therapists, there's 100,000 people. And that's not including African Americans and minorities, which is even fewer than that. I am, and Dr. Wynn, unless you know others, I am probably one of four that I know of African Americans that's practicing counseling in Jacksonville. One of four.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So let that sink in for a minute.
Right.
So, but COVID taught us a lot, and I think the most important thing for me is that it legitimized telehealth as
Right.
where that was an acceptable medium in terms of providing services.
You know, go ahead, Dr. Wynn.
I was just going to say that, and part of that is that the therapists themselves had to adjust. So I was the director of our counseling center at the time, and and actually had years before that had gotten a grant to do some telehealth training. So I was beginning to implement telehealth at the counseling center. And on a Monday, I had a meeting about it with some people who were going to infrastructure at UNF. By Friday, we were shutting down our offices because some staff had been exposed to COVID and we were having symptoms. By Monday, we were on the phone with our clients. By Wednesday, we were on Zoom. And now leading up to that, all the therapists in the office were like, oh, I don't know about all this telehealth stuff. We're going to have to get training. We're going to have to do all these things. We didn't have time for that. You mentioned earlier about building the plane while we fly. We had to build this plane while we were flying it, and we did it. And I love to point that out to them after the fact. That's like, look, we did this. We had to turn on a dime. And so the therapists themselves had to deal with their own issues. We had to deal with all of our own anxieties and issues around delivering services through this medium, and we did.
It's like caring for you. You have to care for yourself while caring for others.
Exactly.
Who was your therapist when you needed, when time came. One of the big things and I agree with you guys 100%. Telehealth made the difference between this country surviving as it is, getting through COVID, just opposed to if we did not allow telehealth to take place. And the insurance companies prior to COVID was so resistant to telehealth, even though we all knew, all of being practitioners, even though we all knew we could do this from a telehealth standpoint, they didn't want to pay, and then so that you wouldn't go out of business. Yeah, they had patients come in, and it's like, I really don't need them to come in. I got more sick people, but in order to stay in business, I need them to come in. And it was ridiculous, the mind frame before telehealth. Before COVID.
Right.
And once COVID hit, just as you guys says, they're begging for you to do telehealth because they knew they were losing. It's almost kind of like the pastors knew that if you didn't get these parishioners in to pay their tithes, you so the insurance companies kind of do the same thing. We got to get some help, and we got to get it fast. And so you guys perform a great service. You're still much, much, much in demand. And it always brings to mind for me, when COVID was in place, was that the OJs, in terms of living for the weekend,
Yeah,
Now,
yeah,
you
yeah,
know, that's what we were doing prior to COVID.
yeah. Uh-huh.
And then you had no outlet when the weekend got there during COVID. And so I think that's what happened with a whole lot of stress and so on and so on.
So in terms of Mr. Baker, before you get off, I know we only have less than 10 minutes with you.
I got some time. I got some time.
Okay. Are you finding that most of the clients that come to you are adults, or are they, older adults, or are they younger people, or more people bring? Because one sad statistic that really has happened over the past several years, as you mentioned about suicide and Black men and suicide in particular. Are you finding that there are more young adult, or what's the age of the folks that are coming in for therapy now with you? Has it changed?
Well, it's changed, but I'm going to share something, and you may want to check this out because you know this, but just even go further. What's most disturbing is the number of Black children that are killing themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Now, in today's statistical data, some are saying that Black children are 2 times more likely to kill themselves than their white counterparts.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't know about you guys, but growing up, where I grew up in Grand Park and on the east side of Jacksonville, we had it hard, if I can say it that way. But killing yourself was never something we thought of. But nowadays, these kids are doing that. And I'm going to come back to your question, but I want to talk about this for a second. And I think that's because of the popularization of social media. And a new paradigm, what people talk about, called social media depression. Never before would we have thought that you can be depressed because you don't get the likes, you don't get the shares, or because people are connecting with you. But there's so many children, teenagers, young adults, even some adults where they're grown behind self. They're acting out because they aren't getting the social media favor that they're looking for. To go back to your question, Jocelyn, my practice is kind of split down the middle. I have a segment of children and teens and adolescents. I have a segment of married couples. I got a lot of married couples. I have a segment of men that come for counseling. And surprisingly, I have a lot of women that come to counseling. A lot of women come for daddy issues, trying to navigate their relationship with their boyfriend, their husband, their fiance, trying to understand their grandson, their nephew, their son. So my practice is kind of split down the middle in terms of clientele.
Yeah, and I'll say it because one thing any of our viewers are accustomed to hearing me share my personal business, if you will. When my father received a terminal illness diagnosis, that's when I went to see a therapist. And I remember Dr. Kane was my doctor at the time. And one of my friends who's a licensed clinical social worker, they both said to me, you could have just talked to me, but I needed to go to see someone else. Right. And I processed that. So, I went for months because that was very traumatic to me. And I mentioned that to say to people that it's nothing to be ashamed of. Right. It actually is therapeutic. To me, it was no different than going to see Dr. Kane as my primary care doctor or any other doctor or the registered dietitian to help me manage my eating well, right? Dr. Nguyen, when we started out, we touched briefly before we came on the air about mental wellness versus mental health. Before you explain that, I want to invite our guests, if you're just joining us, we are talking about mental health tonight. I'm not going to say mental illness. We're talking about mental health and wellness tonight. If you have any questions for our guests, wonderful guests, by the way, please dial in now, 888-669-1280. Or if you prefer, you can post a question and our behind the scenes guy, Tyrone, will make sure that is placed on the screen so that our guests can answer it. So Dr. Nguyen, tell us, mental health versus mental wellness versus mental illness. Break that thing down for us, please.
So think of a continuum, if you will. I'm symbolizing a linear process, but it's really more like it's more like a bunch of circles, right? A Venn diagram. But if we just look at a more of a linear diagram, we think of mental wellness on one end of the spectrum, where we're doing well, we're coping well, even though we might be experiencing some minor stressors in life. We all experience stressors in life. We're able to learn through them, grow through them. Stress oftentimes can help us solidify our coping skills and grow and evolve. So stress in and of itself is not necessarily a bad thing. And you move into more of an intermediate phase where maybe you experiencing more significant levels of stress from who knows what. It could be bad things happening. It could be positive things happening. We think about positive life changes also bring about stress. You get a promotion, you got these new responsibilities, or you're moving to a new town or moving to a new area. So that's not always the stress of life is not always associated with bad things. But in this intermediate phase, the stressors may have a little bit more of an interruption in your functioning, and it may not, take you out the game altogether, but there may be some significant interruptions in your sleep, in your mood states, your appetite. You may have hyper somnia, meaning you're sleeping a lot, or you may have hyposomnia, meaning you're not getting enough sleep. You might overeat, or you might undereat. Like I mentioned earlier about my work with substance use, you might see substance use either begin or increase. But usually you can kind of find your way and get back to your own center and get back to your own health and grow through those challenges. And then say on the other end of the spectrum is mental disorder, mental illness, that many people think about when we say mental health, but mental health is really just broad spectrum. And you could have different health states or different mental health states on this continuum. But mental disorder is when you are experiencing significant disruption in your life and is diagnosable by the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, which guides our diagnostics process. And that can be, there's a whole host of disorders that any of us can experience, up to and including suicide that, Mr. Baker has mentioned already. And one thing that is important, I think, when working with people I like to show them that continuum. I have that kind of laid out in a diagram or graphic, and to ask the client, where do you see yourself on this? Do you see yourself sort of at this end of, minor disruptions, more moderate interference in your functioning, or pretty significant? And then once they identify where they think they are, then I want to know, well, where do you want to be? And what do you think it might take to get you there? What have you tried? If you are at significant disruption, but yet you want to be like most people, fewer disruption in your life, what have you tried? Did it work? And maybe we have to really deconstruct that whole thing and think, well, did it work? Why didn't it work? What are you willing to try differently? And so we can come up with a whole list of options and things that the clients can try differently to help move them to a healthier place. And that includes medication as a resource. A lot of people don't like to talk about medication, but I talk about medication as a resource. You don't have to commit to it for life. But if it can help level the playing field, help get the hormones in your brain functioning the way they're supposed to be functioning, and get you to a level place to where you can continue working on increasing coping skills, with resolving traumatic experiences, going to Mr. Baker for some couples therapy, whatever it takes. Then at some point, you negotiate with your prescribing provider to see, well, do I want to just start getting off this, or do I want to maybe stay on it for a while longer? So all things to me are on the table. I like to also talk about this prevention and mental hygiene as a part of the continuum. So what do you do on a regular basis to attend to your mental health? So most of us, when we say hygiene, we think of brushing our teeth, combing our hair, or for me and Mr. Baker, shaving. Shaving every day is a part of my routine. Putting on some clean clothes, taking a shower, and all that stuff. So think about your mental health, and think about mental health even more broadly as mental, spiritual, emotional health. What do you do on a regular basis every day, throughout the day, to brush your brain, or floss your heart to get rid of the plaque in your heart? What do you do to take care of your mental hygiene? This is something you do on a regular basis, not wait when there's a problem, but do it because you know it keeps you healthy. So I like to talk about mental hygiene as a part of that continuum as well.
One thing I would like to mention is, and through the questions that were posted, when is it time to go and see a mental health professional? Because some people are, they rely on prayer, and they'll go down to the altar for prayer because they are feeling overwhelmed. They'll go and see their primary care physician like Dr. Kane.
Right.
And even families recognizing their loved ones are going through some changes and not knowing what to do, how to even navigate the system. So what would you tell someone to even recognize that, this is beyond going down to the altar for prayer? Not that prayer is not important. Obviously, I'm a Christian and I'll say that. But, when it's time to see a professional, or start with your primary care physician, and then they will refer you. Help us with that conversation. Either of you.
Yeah, so, I'm going to respond to that. I'm going to respond to that, but I want to just kind of move back, acquiesce very quickly to talk about some of the causations of mental health and mental health challenges, because a lot of people don't understand that, and then bring it up to your question, to respond to your question, Jocelyn. So there's some factors that causes mental health challenges, and maybe as I respond to that, it answers your question. So one of the things that I see in my private practice that's very prevalent is sexual abuse and sexual assault and things of that nature. They say statistically that 1 in 6 males have been sexually abused and 1 in 4 females have been sexually traumatized or abused. And abuse doesn't necessarily mean sex or penetration. It could be showing someone pornography at an early age. It could be exposure to stuff that they shouldn't see and things of that nature. Another thing that causes mental health challenges is traumatic events and situation. Now, I know when I was growing up, when I was in the 9th grade, it was junior high school then, I was actually jumped by a gang. And I was beat pretty bad. I didn't tell my mama because I liked my junior high school. She would have transferred me, but I was jumped by a gang. And for a long time, there were certain parts of town that I never went into. And I was just so intimidated and afraid. So traumatic events like that, dealing with issues of abandonment, when you've been abandoned as a child, that can cause some traumatic situations. Also, along with that, now this is going to shock Jocelyn. I know you've heard of this, but church hurt. I have a lot of people that come to me because of the abuse of power in church settings or spiritual settings. Now, some things that can look like a mental disorder, but they may need to go see, if I can say this respectfully, Dr. Big Daddy Kane, right? It is that's my dude, right? Vitamin D deficiency. People that deal with vitamin D deficiencies, that can look like depression because they're sluggish and they're dealing with a lot of things going on in their body. Another thing that mirrors itself like a mental health disorder is undiagnosed diabetes. The rapid changes in blood sugar can cause people to feel like they're dealing with mental situations as well. And so, Jocelyn, what happens is that when things get to a point as to where there's an impairment in function in terms of how they treat themselves, how they treat people, how they relate to the world, if they stop doing the things that they normally enjoy doing, like Dr. Wynn so eloquently said, when they stop eating, they stop flossing, literally stop flossing, stop showering, when they start isolating themselves. Also, unfortunately, when they start cutting themselves. I never forget, I had this young man, it would be the dead of summer, and he always wore 2 long sweaters. Mm-hmm. And his mother just thought it was just no big deal. And the first appointment, his mom said, well, he wears these sweaters. I said, can you pull your sweater up? Can you pull your sleeve up? And he looked at me like, I said, pull your sleeve up. And he literally sat there for like a minute and contemplated. And when he pulled it up, his mother just bust out in tears because he had cuts all up and down his arm for him cutting themselves. So that's another thing too. Along with that, and then Dr. Wynn, I'll turn it over to you and whoever want to share, is this new habit of vaping or electronic cigarettes, because a lot of people I come to, they talk about the fact that they're dealing with anxiety. And the way they cope with anxiety is by doing the vaping or doing the e-cigarettes. And of course, some people just smoke that good old cushion weed. We call it loud, not smoke that loud now.
Oh,
Right?
goodness.
But a lot of people smoke that loud. I never smoked marijuana when I was growing up. I tried it one time. Right? That's all.
I like Bill Clinton.
Okay, I know,
I
right?
ain't going
Okay,
no
I can tell.
But listen, but the smell of it is not what it used to be. Now, I was just around people that smoke. I didn't inhale, like Clinton said. Right? But the point is that again, is that those are certain things, Jocelyn, that when you get to that predicament as where you're relying on things like that to help regulate your mood, when you're being cranky, irritable, you're always angry, frustrated, depressed, that's the time when you need to talk to and see a therapist.
I do need to intervene to step up. And since you mentioned about medical, there are medical concerns and medical issues that will present as depression or resemble depression and or cause depression. And we have to be aware of it. You did mention the vitamin D deficiency, which, you particularly have to look at in the wintertime, and because you don't have as much sunlight, and you don't have a conversion of the substances in your skin to vitamin D, blah, 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 blah. But also you got to remember thyroid related issues. Yeah. We definitely have to look at those. Diabetes is what you said. Sometimes you can have what we call hypoglycemia, which is low blood sugar, but as well as high blood sugars. You got to look at those. So when someone comes in and I suspect or they complain of anything mental, particularly when they're brand new patients and I haven't seen them before, I will not blame it on a mental issue until I have cleared them on physical issues, unless it's just so obvious. I mean, somebody come in with depression, I ain't got time for trying to clear out not depression. Somebody come in suicidal, I don't have time to wait on, lab work and all this other stuff. But there are other things that can present that way. And you need to make sure, your physician need to make sure that they clear those, and you can walk and chew gum at the same time and go on ahead and deal with both issues, physical and mental, and, in terms of your well-being, because your well-being is both physical and mental.
And excuse me. I also believe that the therapist needs to be doing the same thing as asking some general questions. We're not physicians. Usually, well, we have psychiatrists, but psychiatrists don't typically do therapy. And so they are trained physicians. But we can ask some general questions about your physical health, and including when is the last time you had a physical or saw your primary care physician. And that should be a part of our assessment of before we start diagnosing people and developing these wonderful treatment plans. Many people might need to go get a physical or go see a physician to rule out those conditions that you all just mentioned. I wanted to touch on a couple of things, Justin. You had asked a question about when. I'll come to that in a second, but you mentioned that a lot of people say in connection to that question, well, I'll just pray about it. I can't tell you the number of times I've heard people say, well, I don't know about the counseling. I pray. Well, I grew up in a Christian family, and I get that. So did I. And one thing I'll say is to them is, have you ever considered that seeing a counselor could be the answer to your prayer? And so it's not that it has to be either or. It can be all of the above. Come to counseling and don't stop praying. In fact, I want you to keep praying. If you're a praying person, I want you to keep coming, because that'll make my job easier in the counseling room. You keep praying. You pray on the way to counseling. You can pray during the session and pray after the session. But don't stop doing that. And you create a whole system, a whole network of supports and resources for yourself. So I would say to those people who might be thinking that way, don't think of it as either or. It's all of the above.
Well, I do make sure, and I just have to throw it in, that, I'm not a biblical tape recorder that I can recall everything that the Bible says, but I do recall that he does help those that help themselves. and you don't understand, you may not realize in which way he may want to help you.
Right.
And so, your job, both you guys' job, my job, may be the way that the good Lord has sent help to you. What you have to do, and because he recognizes you're smart enough, or he giving you enough intelligence to make some common sense decisions as to what you may think is best for you. However it may be, just make the connection that he comes to you in many different ways.
Exactly.
Is not being a reverend, but is basically the way that I look at it. He can come to you in so many different ways, whether it's Dr. Kane, Mr. Baker, or Mr. Wynn, or even Ms. Turner. It may come to you in whatever different ways that he decides to give it to you.
And one more thing I'll add.
Go ahead, Dr. Wynn. Go ahead, Dr. Wynn.
Is so certainly when there is a problem or disruption in your life, like I was talking about earlier, and all of the concerns that Mr. Baker brought up. But I used to be the outreach coordinator at the counseling center with students when I worked there, and I would always talk to students about coming to counseling when nothing was wrong. And I would say, come for a personal growth experience. Come and let a trained professional listen to where you are in life. You may think, I don't have a problem. Well, that's fine. Then come and have a personal growth experience. Come and have somebody who's trained, who's not a part of your circle, who's an objective ear, because undoubtedly there are some things that you could be working on for growth. They don't have to be, therapy doesn't have to be problem saturated, problem focused. In fact, some of the best work is done from a strengths-based perspective, where you're building on the growth that you're experiencing, but you're able to accelerate that growth, or you're able to deepen your understanding of yourself and others, and that can help you evolve. So I would say the time for counseling is always now. And you don't have to go every single week. You don't have to go even once a month if that's, if you determine that, that's not the pace you need. But I would say, for all of us, check it out. Go get a tune-up. Let somebody look under the hood and see what's going on. It's like we do with our cars. Most of us don't wait. Some of us do. Most of us don't wait till we get broken down on the side of the road before we go take the car in or tune up for maintenance. Now, if you have a newer car, it'll tell you, it'll start talking to you. It's time to go. It keeps reminding you, it's time to take me in for a checkup. So
objective being the key word.
Yes.
Yeah, I like that, Dr. Wynn. That is so right on time, because people often think that it's, they connotate going for mental health counseling as something negative. Oh, she crazy. Oh, he's crazy. I love how you said that. It's just, everything could be going good with you. It's just, just as you go in relating it to, as we do with our vehicles, we go in and make sure, get them tuned up. So go and get tuning up for yourself, because some folks they recognize that their loved ones may need a tune up, but trying to convince their loved ones that they need tune up, right? Like, how do you move from, I recognize that my loved one might need a tune up, but convincing their loved one to go for the tune up. That's the other challenge.
Mr. Baker.
I was going to say, thank you. I would think Dr. King, I meant Bishop King. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Pastor King.
Big Daddy King.
Big Daddy. When you like Big Daddy, we'll take Big Daddy. All right. But what I was going to say too, another challenge that I see, and I think Dr. Wynn brought it up so well, and Ms. Turner, you alluded to it, and Dr. Kane touched on it, is the conversation you have with yourself, your internal dialogue, your self-talk. Your self-talk is so critical to your mental and even part of your physiological health as well. I was reading a book, and there's a concept called low-key suicide. Low-key suicide. And what this is basically, for example, if someone has diabetes, but they're eating a bunch of sugar, they're just killing themselves, but it's just a low-key way of doing it. If someone has high blood pressure and they're eating pork and a bunch of salt in their food, they're killing themselves, unbeknownst to them, they're killing themselves maybe at a faster rate. But I believe that it goes a step farther than that, because I truly believe that the things that we say out of our mouths is a direct manifestation of sometimes what happens. Let me give you an example. I can prove what I'm about to share. Tupac constantly talked about dying of an early death. He died of an early death. Biggie Smalls constantly talked about dying of an early death. He died of an early death. There's some newer hip-hop artists called Juice WRLD. He's a very well-known hip-hop artist. He constantly rapped about overdosing on drugs. Guess what? He died of a drug overdose. There was another Grammy Award winner rapper, I think he won a Grammy, named Mac Miller. He used to date Ariana Grande. He constantly talked about overdosing on drugs, and guess what? He died of a drug overdose. So I believe that this concept of low-key suicide, which, by the way, it was brought up by Dr. Rita Walker, which is a very powerful psychologist, I believe, at the University of Houston. But that low-key suicide thing is not just about what we do, it's the conversation that we have with ourselves. And you'll be amazed the number of people that their internal dialogue causes them depression, causes them anger, causes them to constantly overthink and undermine themselves to a point as to where they back themselves in a corner and they feel trapped by their own words.
I may be getting a little bit Freudian here. But one of the, not me actually, is one of the viewers asked, what about, they phrase it in a couple of different ways, daddy issues, parenting, yada, yada, yada. Anybody can comment on that. The role that parents play in terms of the stability of one's mental health, the view of that a person may take of their own mental health, blah, 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 blah. You understand the question?
Mm-hmm. Well, when people talk about daddy issues, I think generally we tend to, the go-to is to think about abandonment or father absence. You might think of people who grew up without a father in the home. So abandonment certainly is experienced by a lot of people when they think daddy issues. There also could be issues of abuse and all kinds of trauma, the whole spectrum of trauma that could have been perpetrated by daddy or mommy. And I'll say it could also be related to something Mr. Baker mentioned about church hurt. It could be maybe they were in an over religious or excessively religious experience where they were forced to have to live a life that was overly saturated with religion, and so it could be a whole number of things. It could be that their parents, their daddy, mommy, or both their parents were just struggling themselves with mental health issues and just didn't have the capacity to provide a healthy living environment and care. So maybe it wasn't outright abuse, or it was abandonment, or it was just that it was inadequate parenting, to where they were doing the best they could do, but it wasn't enough to create the conditions for their children to be optimally healthy. And so they're dealing with these issues as a young adult, or even as an older adult. I think a lot of people, even older adults who come to counseling, are still dealing with parenting issues and parent experiences from their parenting.
Well, generationally
speaking, Dr. K, let me share something. Let me share something that I think you can recognize. You guys can understand this. I was working with a gentleman, and this guy carried around trauma for over 50 years. He was traumatized at 5 or 6 years old, and he carried this around for over 50 years. Couldn't tell anyone, didn't feel the shame, felt embarrassed. That's another situation in terms of abuse. I'll be honest, I got a lot of spankings, and all of them were well-deserved, right? But there's a certain... Okay, Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. I wasn't that bad boy, like Luther, bad boy, right? But certain parenting styles brought about this very authoritarian situation. But another thing too, Dr. Wynn, that some people come to me and talk about, believe it or not, is the uninvolvement of the father. The uninvolvement. The father's in the home, but he's not involved. So much so to the point, Dr. K and Ms. Jocelyn, as to where the father didn't rescue the children from the mother. The mother was the abuser, and the father didn't do anything to protect them.
Yes.
And
so not only is it everything, what's that? Yeah, right. Exactly. And so those are some of the things that I hear in counseling sessions as well.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
You know, somebody asking just now, what about the mama issues? And that's why I said, you know, just before they put it up there, vice versa. You know, that we're looking at generational concerns, issues, because my generations, there were certain things that, you know, if I said shut up, you shut up. You don't have no right to an opinion. You know, you're in my house, blah, blah. You guys all know the scenario behind that. And now we come up with trying to raise a generation of children that we're trying to get a little bit more freedom in terms of involvement, in terms of as it relates to their behavior. Because all I did, you know, if I didn't do what they told me to do, that was a switch, a razor blade, or whatever they decided to use.
A razor blade?
I'm just joking about razor blade.
I may still have to report that, Dr. King.
Razor blade. Oh my God.
I might have to call and report that. I don't think there's a statute of limitations.
But it was accepted behavior at that time. Be quite frank with you. You know, your parents just corporal punishment was the way that they saw it. Now, granted, that was slavery and the remnants of slavery and things that they saw and the way that they believe, yada, 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 yada. And so if you're looking at maybe my kids who are much older and they've been able to discern, you know, whether or not daddy was, I didn't have to beat them. I might have, when they were very young, once or twice, but after that, they just knew the way to go, and I knew I didn't have to touch them at that point in time. But there are some people who are just adamant in terms of corporal punishment being the only way.
Yeah.
Okay, to make their children listen and understand the right things to do in life, whether it's going to church every day, you know, that God sent, or whatever it may be. I just said that, not necessarily expecting you guys to respond to it, but feel free to do so.
Let me just say, so this I was on a panel many years ago, and this issue came up about corporal punishment, spanking, whoopings, whatever you want to call them. And I had a not so popular opinion about this and on the panel because people didn't agree with me. But you know, I think there are many ways to intervene and to correct behavior, to inspire children to either comply or to to cooperate. And so one of the things, the point I made in this panel was that we look at the state of our society today, and especially with our young Black men who, many, not all of us, but many will be extremely violent if they feel disrespected, if you somehow violate their personal space, and they resort to, it's from 0 to 1,000, and it's nothing in between, and it's, I'm going to shoot you, I'm going to kill you, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. And I say, well, think about that some of them might have learned that violence is the way to correct behavior from their parents, using violence to correct their behavior when they were younger. And I don't care what you call it, spankings, beatings, whoopings, that is still violence. And if what they learned was, the way that you get correction, the way that you correct someone's behavior is to beat them, is to use violence, is to aggress them, then I'm not surprised that we have a culture that is full of violence. And so there were people in the audience who said, well, I turned out just fine. And so I get it. I get that, many people were exposed to corporal punishment and they didn't resort to a life of violence. But you can't say that that there is not that connection. I will never say that every single person who embraces violence today was, subject to corporal punishment, but I'm very curious about what that connection is among the people who are sitting in jail today, or who are no longer with us because they got into a violent altercation. What is the relationship between corporal punishment and their experience with violence?
I tell you what, this show has been absolutely amazing.
And too short.
And unfortunately, I promised our audience that in the beginning that it was going to be a great show, and it has been a wonderful discussion. And as Dr. Kane has shamefully said in the past, putting you on the spot, we want you back, you both back again, right? This was absolutely amazing. And yes, we are at the end of the hour.
And we just scratched the surface.
Exactly. Yeah. But thank you both so much. Every time we end the show, we do like to give our guests an opportunity to share their final thoughts regarding tonight's topic. So I will start with you, Mr. Baker. What are your final thoughts regarding tonight's topic? And how do people get in touch?
I just want to encourage someone.
Hold on a second. And how do people get in touch?
Right. Thank you so much, Josh. I appreciate it. I just want to encourage someone today. May is National Mental Health Month. So I just want to encourage you, because many of you have been putting this off for a long time about making an appointment. Some of you have said, I can't find an African-American male counselor. I don't know where they're at. Well, here we are. We're right here. So I want to encourage you today to make that appointment, 904-322-2162. Give us a call. We can certainly take care of you. And I want you to remember something. If you aim too low, there's nowhere to go. But if you aim higher, you will reach your desire. Thank you.
All right.
Wow. Can you say that again?
You want to call? Talk about Big Daddy Kane. Baker the Maker.
That was pretty awesome. Thank you, Mr. Baker. Dr. Nguyen, what are your final thoughts regarding tonight's topic?
Thank you.
So thank everybody who's logged on and is watching. Thank you for your interest. I say tune into your own well-being, tune into yourself, meet your own needs before trying to help somebody else or meet somebody else. Think about the mental hygiene. What can you do? It doesn't have to be super profound. It could be something as small as changing a routine, doing something different to introduce change into your life. Do something for yourself mentally and emotionally every single day, including my favorite thing to do, which is breathing. And I don't mean that shallow stuff that keeps your organs alive. I mean deeply diaphragmatic breathing. And I won't take us through that now since I know we're at the end, but look it up. Deep breathing, diaphragmatic breathing, that works wonders for your system. But do something every single day for your mental and emotional health. Unfortunately, I'm not currently practicing right now. I'm still at UNF and in an administrative role, so I'm not currently practicing, but I'm more than happy to help people out. If I got a call today about someone wanting a referral, so you can reach me at rwynn@unf.edu, rwynn@unf.edu, and I'll be more than happy to. And I'll refer you to Mr. Baker. I'm gonna send that referral request I got earlier. I'm gonna send them to you.
Thank you so much, both of you. Dr. Kane, what are your final thoughts regarding tonight's topic?
I got a couple of quick things, and I will be quick. I do want to thank Mr. Baker for being able to stay on the whole hour. I know he had some other things that he needed to get into, but we appreciate you so very much, as well as we appreciate Dr. Richmond Nguyen. In terms of coming to our show and being such great mental health advisors, period, just not about mental health. So I'm very happy that you guys graced us with your presence this evening. But I will piggyback on Dr. Nguyen, in which you cannot save anyone else until you save yourself first. The very first thing they teach you when you get on an airplane and they say it's going down, put your mask on first.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we have to do. Put our mask on first so we can reach out and help others. And the last thing would be Mr. Baker. The biggest problem I have with what you said this evening, we don't have enough of you guys. You know, you can say there's plenty of us out there, but there are not enough. If you could get together a group of LLC, mental health therapists, whomever it may be, you know, not only would it be very profitable, but it'd be very beneficial to the community. Because I'm always reaching out, trying to find someone to send my patients to, and the backlog is 6 months, and it's been so far out that by that time I got to do all the counseling myself just to get the patients through that. And as you know, Big Daddy Kane that's not his.
I know, because yours is preaching.
All right, guys. I appreciate you guys very much for coming on to the show. Last word, Ms. Turner.
Yes, again, thank you, Dr. Wynn, and thank you, Mr. Baker, and of course, my co-host, Dr. Kane. Tonight was a very, very awesome conversation. Mr. Baker mentioned that it is Mental Health Awareness Month. And by the way, the theme is more than enough. Think about more than enough. An opportunity for us to all come together and remember the inherent value we each hold, no matter our diagnosis, appearance, socioeconomic status, background, or ability. We are more than enough. Thank you all for tuning in to Pause for the Truth. Tune in next week as we continue our discussion on another important topic. Dr. Wynn, Mr. Baker, have a great evening, and we hope to have you back on our show. Take care. Stay well.
Very much.
Thank you.